We got it going? Okay. You're all set over there? Our friends from the web universe? Okay. Call this meeting to order. If everyone can please rise if they're able to stand for the national anthem. Just remember to either turn off or silence your devices this evening, both counselors and those in the gallery. We are in the special council meeting. It's a public hearing this evening. I need a confirmation of mover and a seconder for confirmation of agenda. Councillor Bodner, Councillor Bagu. Any questions? All those in favor? That's carried. With regards to the public hearing, any conflicts of interest? So we do have a public hearing under the Development Charges Act. Todd Rogers will be taking this tonight. It's Planning and Development Department Planning Division Report 2019-132. Subject public hearing report, background study and development charges bylaw update. We have a presentation of the background charges from Byron Tan of Watson and Associates Economists Limited. So if you want to come up to the podium.
If I may, Your Worship, just beforehand. Just before we get started, I just have to introduce this being a public meeting, if you don't mind. The purpose of this meeting is pursuant to the provisions of Section 12 of the Development Charges Act, RSO 1997, is being held to present and obtain public input on the city's proposed development charges bylaw and underlying background study. The Development Charges Act requires municipalities to update their development charge bylaw every 5 years, including a background study and creation of a new bylaw. So there is a required method of notice, and the notice of the public was administered in accordance with Section 12 of the Development Charges Act 1997, and the notice of the public meeting was posted on the city's website and did appear in the Leader publication on July 25th, 2019. So I'll just give a brief explanation on the procedure that we're going to follow for the public meeting tonight. I'll present the report, which is here and is in your package, and I will, following the presentation from Mr. Tan, I'll receive questions of clarification from council for planning staff. We'll then open the meeting to the public for comments and questions. Following that, though, I'll announce the requirements under the Development Charges Act for written notice of passage of the proposed background study and development charges bylaw update, and then provide a brief explanation of future meetings regarding the application.
Thanks, Todd.
So now we can go forward. Thank you, Your Worship.
Well, good evening, Mayor, members of council, staff, members of the public. Tonight is the development charge public meeting, which is mandatory under the DCA, as the CBO had mentioned. Unfortunately, Gary Scanlon could not be here today, so I'm hoping that I could fill in his shoes and provide you with the information that you require today. Gotcha. There we go. So just the purpose of the public meeting under the DCA 1997. Public meeting is to provide an overview of the DC and receive public input from members of council and from the public. It is mandatory under the DCA. And this is, no decisions need to be made tonight. Everything will be taken into consideration, and we will reconvene in later date in order to consider the draft bylaw. So the format, we'll just have the opening remarks, which we just had, the presentation of the proposed policy and charges, and I'll walk you through briefly on the development charges and how they've progressed to date. We'll have any members of the public provide their input. Any questions from council, I'll be glad to answer, and then we'll conclude. So just to give you an order of magnitude of the process, we started this in July of 2018. We've had meetings with staff, developed a growth forecast, policy review, reviewed all the capital works to be included within the development charge study. And that wrapped up in May of this year. We released the final report back in July 24th, which also had the draft bylaw. We're here today, the public meeting of council, and we're looking to be back to council on September 23rd for the consideration of the bylaw as it may evolve from today's meeting. The development charges, so the purpose is to recover capital costs from residential and non-residential growth within a municipality. They are in addition to what you would normally require a subdivision or a developer to construct, which is internal to their development. So to give you an example, if they were to construct, if a new subdivision were to be built, you would require them to put the internal roads and any of the water mains and sewer. Any upsizing to that in order to connect and service that subdivision would be a development charge cost. And municipalities are empowered through the DCA in order to enforce these. Some of the limitations on the services, which are part of the DCA requirements, are the headquarters of the general administration of the municipality. Now, the headquarters general administration is a little bit more broad because it is clerks, CAO's office, council chambers. So if you do have a public works yard that would be attached to the city hall, that would be eligible. It would not be necessarily excluded. Arts, culture, museum, and entertainment facilities have been exempt from the development charge recovery. The only thing that was allowed to continue after 1997 were library services. Tourism facilities are ineligible, provision for a hospital, parkland acquisition, and that's why you have parkland dedication through the Planning Act in order to recover those costs. Now, that's not to say that you can't develop parkland. So once you do receive the parkland through other means, the DC does allow you to be able to develop parkland using development charge. Excuse me. And then vehicles and equipment with an average life of 7 years or greater is eligible. This was instituted in 1997 because some municipalities were, including, golf carts and weed whackers and hammers and nails. So it has to be of significant capital value in order to be for recovery. As well as waste management services. Historically, anything that's non-waste diversion related has been excluded. As of January 1st, 2016, Bill 73 updated the Development Charges Act to allow for waste diversion. So just quickly on the methodology that we've used for this development charge process. So first off, we identified the amount, type, and location of growth within the city. And then we take a look at the servicing needs in order to accommodate that growth. So depending on every 1,000 people, you need X amount of recreation space or roads, et cetera. Then in order to meet that service, then we look at the capital cost to provide the services of those needs. So will it be additional roads? Will it be a rec center? Will it be more fields, soccer fields? So we identify the servicing and then the cost for provided. After that, we need to deduct some of these amounts from the development charge calculation in the forms of grant subsidies and other contributions. Anything that's benefiting the existing development needs to be deducted from the calculation as it's not growth related. And then for the soft services, the statutory 10% deduction. So once we do all of the above deductions, If you're outdoor recreation, indoor recreation, or libraries, immediately cut 10% off the top. That way, it keeps municipalities having some contribution to the growth-related works. And then as well, any amounts in excess of the 10-year historical service calculation. So what that means is if there's any works that are benefiting the post period. So if we have a 10-year horizon to look at capital works, if you're benefiting growth that's outside of the 10 years, then that would be recovered at a later bylaw and not within this one. And then as well with your DC reserve funds, between collections from year over year, if you do have any positive or negative balances, that needs to be rationalized within the capital works. So if you have any positive reserves, then that would be deducted from the capital amounts because you've already collected the money. Inversely, if you have any negative reserves, that would be included in order for recovery so that you'll be back to zero. And then your net cost is then allocated between residential and non-residential benefit. So when we get down to the final dollar value, it must be split between the residential and non-residential. And then finally divide that by the growth in order to calculate the DC. Impact of Bill 73, so just to give you a quick update. So with Bill 73 that was passed post your last DC study, there are a number of changes which include no additional levies, which basically means that you cannot require a developer or any developments to pay additional services that are not identified within the development charge study or your local service policy. And I'll talk about that in a second. Annual reporting has changed for the treasurer, so they're just more different forms that they have to fill out, more paperwork. The key one here is ensuring that the background study is available 60 days prior to the bylaw passage. Prior to this bill, we would be able to pass release a background study and pass it within 21 days of your public meeting and then have the bylaw on the same night. Now it has to be on the streets for a minimum of 60 days in order for the public and any developers to be able to react to it. And then we need to look at area rating as part of the background study. It's not mandatory, but it is something that council must turn their mind to. Right now you do have water and wastewater on the urban area, so if you are building with water, wastewater services, you are charging that DC. Well, exemptions from the DCA. So the mandatory ones right now, we do have industrial building expansions that may expand up to 50% without having to pay a DC. Now, there may be cause for abuse for this, but it has been set so that you could draw the line in the sand where an industrial development won't come in, expand their 100,000 square foot to 150, and then not pay a DC, come back again, take out another 50%, go to 225, so on and so forth. So we've set up your DC bylaw so that way they get one industrial expansion exemption. You may add up to 2 additional apartments to a single detached home as long as you don't double the size of the home. You may add 1 additional unit to medium or high density, and that you do not have to pay a DC. And then as well, there's the cross-government upper and lower tier and school boards. So if you were to build a building, Niagara Region doesn't charge you a DC. Likewise, if they built, you don't charge them. Now, there are discretionary exemptions that are available for council, at your disposal to amend the policy as required. One is to reduce in part or in whole the DCs for types of development or classes of development. A type would be a church. A class would be exempting all of industrial. You may phase in over time. As I understand it, you have deferred your development charges. So one of the options that may be discussed is to be able to phase in your charges over time, whether that's 20% every year for the next 5 years, 25 up to year 4, or even just go to 100% immediately if you'd like. And then redevelopment credits to recognize what is being replaced on site. This wasn't within the DCA, but it has been proven at the OMB. If I had my house burnt down within a certain amount of time, usually 5 years, I should be able to replace that home without having to pay a development charge. So for Port Colborne's discretionary exemptions that are contained within the DC bylaw, and we've carried this over to the from your previous DC bylaw to this current one, you do have your non-residential farm buildings, your downtown core areas, which are described within your bylaw and your maps. industrial development exemption on any square footage over 5,000 square feet, residential development within the Shirkston secondary plan, brownfield properties, and partial exemption for CIP areas based upon council approval. Local service policies, as I was mentioning earlier, Bill 73 had changed this to ensure that municipalities were not charging developers any additional works that is not within your power. So what that means is if you do not specify that works within a subdivision have to be expanded, and you require a developer to do so, they can come back and say, well, technically it wasn't within the local service policy, so what you did was not allowed, so I'd like to have a credit for it or my money back for any of my development charges I paid. As well, we did include a local service policy within your development charge study, which enhances it from what was available last time. So it's a little bit more all-encompassing, requires the developers to create certain works, dedicate certain parkland to a grade that was acceptable to staff based on our review with them. And that local service policy really looks at items such as collector arterial roads, intersection improvements, streetlight sidewalks, really any of the complete streets, noise abatement, water, wastewater, storm, park requirements. So the relationship between the needs and services of growth and funding is pretty much summarized within this triangle here. So if you do have growth within the city and you have to service that growth, really it falls down between two areas. Either you collect the development charge in order to help pay for that growth-related works, or put it on rates, taxes, or reserves. There's no magic to it. This is just development charges are really a tool just to help you fund capital works that are coming from new development, and if not, then it'll be just on the rates. The growth forecast right now that we are working with looks at 10-year horizon as based on this chart. So you can see in the black here was your historical building permit activity, with the red being your average. There was a spike between 2007 and 2017, and 2018. So with the historical trend and the approved development in the pipeline, our demographics team working with staff have identified roughly an average of 45 units per year of building. As you can see in the dark blue at the bottom, that would be your low density. That medium in the middle would be your townhouses, rural housing. And then the orangey yellow at the top would be your high density, which would be your apartments. So just to look at your 10-year forecast, we're looking at an increase of 842 people into the city, with 446 units. Again, that's the mix of the low, medium, and high density. And we're expecting 327,000 square feet of non-residential construction. And then to 2031, which is really just another 3 years on top of the 10-year forecast. In order to target your OPs, that's what we were going with. We're looking at 1,032 population increase, 540 residential units, and 387,000 for your non-residential. And you'll see that the urban forecast, which we base our water and wastewater calculations on, again, for the serviced portions of the municipality, we're looking at 423 units. Translates to about 874 people, and just under 370,000 non-res square footage. So the summaries being considered for this round would be similar to your last DC study, which is your service related to highway, fire, recreation, indoor and outdoor, library services, and then water and wastewater. And just going back to the studies, so the prior studies over the past few years, over the past DC iterations, always had administration as one category. But for this purpose, we've actually split it up into your engineering-related studies and community-based studies. And the reason we did that is in anticipation of Bill 108. With the community benefits charges on the horizon, should you decide to pursue that charge, this would make it easier for us to be able to identify which services would be included as part of the CBC versus which ones would be part of the DC. And that way we could just split it off and it'd be a little bit easier for transition purposes. So your current charges right now, which again have been deferred through the life of the bylaw, and these are unindexed, looking at just under $8,600 per single detached home, and that's for your citywide as well as your urban services. Multiples are looking at 5,700. Apartments with 2+ bedrooms are at 5,450, and small apartments are at just under 3,700. And your non-residential's at $3.16 per square foot. Based on this round of calculations, we're looking for the most part of containing most of your capital works within the last DC have just been inflated and included into this DC study. So we're looking at $11,419 for a single detached dwelling, $8,430 for the other multiples, all the way down to $5,000 for apartments, small apartments. We've added another category called special care special dwelling at $4,560 per unit. And what that is if you do have any Chartwells or any type of retirement homes, most of the time they don't consume similar services such as an apartment. They're a little bit more contained, more 1.1 persons per unit type of units. So we've identified a charge that if you were to have that kind of development, it would be at a lesser charge than charging them, say, an apartment. And then as well with the non-residential, we're now at $4.10. Just to give you a little comparison, assuming that we were to index your charge to $2019, we're just under $10,000. Now, this was actually before the Q2 StatsCan indexing came out, which came out on August 20th. And if this was indexed to include that index that just came out last week, you'd be over $10,000, like $10,000 and $10,028, something along that range. So really, with your calculated, you're just going up by roughly $1,400 from your last DC till now, assuming all things equal. And you can see the biggest charge there was more for the wastewater services. There were more items that can now be collected as part of this DC round. And then as well, looking at your indoor recreation, you do have the debt charges that you're still paying for your new community center, and that has been included in here for recovery. Hence, you can see the difference between the $1,700 to the $3,000 for the indoor recreation. And then for your non-residential DC, you're at $3.65, moving up to $4.10. Again, if we included the latest indexing that just came out last week, your current charge would actually be at $3.68. So just 3 cents more than what's currently shown on here. So just to give you a overview of the development charges that have taken place within the Niagara region, you're currently at the as you can see, third from the very right. The only ones that are to the right of you are Waynfleet, and that's because they do not have water and wastewater servicing. So therefore, their regional charge also reflects no water and wastewater within. And then going to the left, you have St. Catharines, which obviously is the same charge as you because they do not have a development charge. And then all the way to the Thorold, Pelhams, and Lincoln development charges, which are ranging anywhere from $35,000 all the way to $50,000, and that includes your lower tier charges, which is the dark blue at the bottom. The gray is your upper tier, which is Niagara region, and then the red, as you can see, that small sliver is the education DCs. Looking at your commercial charges, you are currently in line with St. Catharines, obviously, because you both do not have lower tier charges, and then it goes anywhere from just under $7 all the way to $26. Again, Lincoln, Pelham, Thorold lead the pack on the commercial. And then assuming that you were to implement a calculated charge, essentially you'd move up 4 spots just past Niagara Falls. And then similarly to industrial, you're pretty much on par with other municipalities that have chosen to exempt non-industrial. But even if it was implemented, the difference between your current to the calculated basically would be the $4.10, which we've calculated for you. Just a quick update on Bill 108. So this bill has been introduced by the province back in May. It was a very fast-paced bill. Within 1 month, they were able to take it to royal assent and provide quite a bit of draft regulations. But I use that term loosely. It's more of a white paper because there's not exactly, the terms haven't been defined yet. They released some definitions, released some items that they wish to change, but the regulations have not been finalized. So how it affects the development charges, as you can see that it changes to eligible services. So all your soft services will now not be ineligible under the Development Charges Act and will be placed under the community benefits charge, which we're still hashing out the regime and how to calculate it. Gary Scanlon from our office is part of the working committee in order to help determine what that charge may be. And in the coming weeks, if there's any more information that we can share, we would gladly share it with staff and as well as council. But as of right now, there is still nothing to be discussed. But in terms of what has been released, so for the soft services, it will be part of this community benefits charge, which will be roughly based on a percentage valuation of the property. So where a development charge is based on a per unit charge, the CBC is looking for a percentage on the value of the lot prior to building permit issuance. So on the day just before a building permit, an appraiser will come, provide you with a dollar value for that, and then depending on the percentage that's allocated to, per se, the city of Port Colborne, you can only charge up to a maximum amount. Now, we're still not sure whether that percentage will be shared between the upper tier. So if it's, for example, 10%, will you be getting 7 and the Niagara region get 3? Will it be 5 and 5? Will it be 10 and they get an additional 10? We're still not sure of those details, but as more information comes out, we'll be happy to share that with you. Some other changes, there will be payments and installments. So over 6 years for rental housing as well as non-profit, and as well as non-residential, they'll be able to pay their DC in 6 annual installments. And then for non-profit housing, they'll be able to pay over 20 years. Actually, it's 21 years to be exact. So it's a lot of work for your treasurer to be able to track all this over that period of time. And then as well, the DC, the amount will be determined, at the building permit stage currently. But however, the proposed change would have the DCs calculated on the date of application of site plan or zoning amendment. So once a development comes in, they'll have up to 2 years to be able to pay that development charge that has been frozen at that point in time. With respect to some of the other items of the CBC, you may impose a bylaw. Again, we're still not sure what the details are of that yet. These services may not include any of the services authorized under the DCA. Obviously, you're not charging for one and the same services on the other on 2 regimes. And then as well, as I mentioned earlier, it'll be probably based on a percentage, and the valuation date's the day before the building permit. And there are still some transitional provisions that are trying to be hashed out right now. So really on your reserve funds for your soft services, how will they be transferred over when you have a CBC regime? And just to give you a brief timeline, so as of right now, Royal Assent, as you can see, took place in June 6th with the first reading back on May 2nd. So we're in really this section 3 right here where we're not sure exactly when the draft proclamation is yet, but it can be any time from now up until January 1st, 2020. That was the deadline that the province put on themselves in a presentation that they provided. But the province does sit back in October, so again, we're thinking that it could be proclaimed anytime from now till then. And with that being said, once the DC is passed, you'll have until January 1st, 2021 in order to implement a CBC bylaw if you want to continue to collect for any soft services or any planning related matters for that as well. And for the next steps, we have our bylaw passage, or at least consideration of the bylaw for September 23rd. And that is it for my presentation.
Good, thanks, Byron. Questions from councilors? Councilor Bruno.
Worship, you mentioned one of the charges, the DC charges that attach itself to the valet center, the debt charge.
Yes.
So, because this is a 5-year review of that, Those charges are not too long forecast to be paid. Is there an automatic adjustment internally that the municipality makes to lower that?
I'm sorry, what do you mean by lowering that?
So if the debt charge is no longer there, the debt's been serviced, it's been extinguished, it's been paid off, that was calculated into that section of the DC charge, right?
Yes.
The debt charges. So when it disappears, that changes that number ever so slightly, no?
Yes, so once that debt debenture has been paid, upon your next DC review or any time in between, we could do an update in order to not collect for that portion of the development charge anymore.
Great. In your package that we received, it talks about under item 3, area rating. Council must consider the use of area-specific charges. If I missed that, could you go through that, what that means?
So through Bill 73, area rating is something that council can consider or must turn their minds to. And what that is to be able to charge a specific area a certain development charge that would benefit that area only, if that is something that you'd like to pursue. Now, in speaking with staff, the only items that we would recommend that would be charged on an area specific would be for water, wastewater, or storm. We do not recommend it for anything other than those services. And an example I would give is, say, a rec center. If you were to charge a recreation center for a certain area, we would have to look at the growth only within that area, and that would assume that no one else within the city or municipality would be utilizing that facility. Whereas with that being said, any financing that would be required in order to fund that would be isolated within just that area, and anything that can't be collected through development charges would have to be collected through your taxes, reserves, grants, other funding sources. With water or wastewater, since it's very isolated, it's clear that that subdivision or specific area will be receiving the services and the pipes and the works to be used within that area. It makes much more sense to be able to charge any development that would be having direct benefit from those pipes.
So if I could drill down on that, if you're looking at area specific, it could be an area that's underdeveloped and you want to provide growth or a stimulus there.
Yes.
How about on a different note? It's not, where would we deal with things like affordable housing? Because that could be infill, but it could be non-specific area. It could be anywhere in the city. Are there any provisions for that?
So with respect to any development, as I mentioned in one of my slides, you could provide for any type of exemption or any type of exemption for any types or classes of development. And if affordable housing would be one of those items that you'd like to not charge, we would just word the bylaw in a certain way where that would be one of the exempt items. But again, this is all for council's consideration.
So does that have to be discussed with you and your firm before this comes back? In other words, does that area have to be noted? Or can it be inserted along the way in the 5 years for the next review?
So this can be through amendment through the bylaw, can be done anytime within the 5 years. All it is just doing a quick update to the bylaw. Again, anything that may require a quick calculation or study will need to be done, and then we'd have to do the 60-day posting I've shown earlier.
Okay.
If there were.
And then finally, maybe this is internally as well and not in the DC charges. So when a municipality decides it can waive development charges, can it also phase them back in? Can it also reduce certain development charges at a factor of 50% or 25%? Does it have that flexibility?
Yes, it does. So as I mentioned in one of my previous slides, you do have the discretionary exemptions where you can phase in the charge wholly or partly. So if council decides, for an example, to phase it in by 20% every year until year 5, where you implement the full 100% of the charge, that is totally your discretion. Likewise, you could do 50% one year and then 100% the next year. There's different ways we could set up the bylaw where we can drop a table with a percentage, and every year it would just automatically adopt the percentage that was put forward.
So generally speaking, we don't have to come necessarily back to Watson. We can do that internally with our bylaw?
Yes.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Council. Council Borgard?
Through your worship to our presenter, I have three questions. So, going off Councillor Bruno, when you're in terms of the area-specific calculations, how are these boundaries created? Like, how are these areas created? Are they just strictly where that development is happening, and that's it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Our demographics team would have worked with your planning staff in order to determine what areas of the city were serviced. And then from that, we would come up with the calculations on the growth within those areas. And I believe the mapping of the urban areas was provided by planning staff. I don't have that on me right now, but it would have been mapped out in such of that way that they would identify what portion were serviced and which were not.
Okay, thanks. Question number two. So, the growth forecast, I think the growth forecast in the next 10 years was around 800 and something approximately. If it were to be wrong, let's say we got exponential growth within that time frame, how would that affect us at all in terms of having a more conservative number opposed to a more aggressive number?
Well, in this case, it'd be a two-part an answer to that. One would be if you were to exceed that growth forecast, perhaps the discussion should be to revisit the development charge study, because to make sure that the capital works that we did identify is sufficient to service that aggressive growth. Because if not, you'll be charging essentially the same rate, and whether it's a positive number or a negative number at the end of the day, the development charge reserve fund would reflect that based on the increase in development.
Okay, thanks. And so my third question, how much of an impact does development charges really have on development? Logically, you would think the less you charge, the less charges there are, development charges, the more development you may see. However, on that one chart, you showed that the development charges that exist, broken down by municipality, and those who have it who have a development charge actually are, in my opinion anyways, correct me if I'm wrong, are seeing more development already. So why wouldn't we have a development charge, I guess? It seems like if you don't, you're kind of losing out. So if you can answer that.
So looking at municipalities throughout Ontario, again, policy in order to enact or basically defer development charge is through council. Those that see high growth really are other factors, on top of development charges, which are really a small factor of development. A lot of items would be, access to a 400 highway. It's basically it's a proximity from a major hub, such as like a Toronto, a Hamilton, GTA. So there are other taxes are another one as well. So development charges are only one aspect of development. And if you look at home prices compared to development charge increases, especially over the past 5 years, home prices have gone up anywhere from 20 to basically 100% in some cases, whereas development charges really are stable with non-res, consumer price index, basically our indexing, and then as well as any capital works that have been identified. So to answer your question, it's a mixed bag, where development happens, and if development charges are a factor or not. As you mentioned in your question, you look at Pelham, you look at Thorold, Grimsby, Lincoln, highest on that graph that I provided, but they're also having growth as well. So it doesn't look like that maybe there is a direct correlation, but there is some impact, but it's not the whole picture.
Good, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clell.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. My understanding is that when you look at the cost of a piece of land, property for a building, that 80% of a building, a finished product, a finished home to be sold is related to land costs associated with it, all of the pieces, the roads, so the infrastructure, everything going into it. Would that be a good estimation, 80%?
When you say the road cost, is that the cost
I'm not talking, all hard services for it, the water, wastewater, roads, transit, all those different things?
Are you talking about the cost of the home or like the development charge in general for
Well, I'm
that
just talking about
80%.
as a development cost. I was told that 80% of the end cost of a home that you're looking at is related mostly to the land cost, the land purchases, all of the things that need to go into it to do a development. Would that be a rough estimate, would you say?
I can't say one way or the other right now. I don't have those.
Well, my
figures in
reason
front
for
of me.
asking is just that I was just at a conference and they were talking about this and the fact that they were saying that when you don't charge development charges, that it really does, the costs, all of those costs, hard costs, go to the ratepayers that are there.
That's correct.
And then what happens is that they're actually paying for development to occur, and then the houses, sometimes because we've had this great increase in house costs, that we're really not seeing that savings. People aren't seeing it. The savings, the homes are still going up in cost, and then taxes are being raised as well in order to cover the costs that weren't covered for the development charges. And they also spoke about, one other thing I found very interesting, they talked about the fact that developers can purchase these properties, and sometimes they don't even develop them. They end up not having to pay development charges, and they get them all ready to be used, and then they can basically flip them and sell them, and they're ready to go. They make their money on the sale to the next purchaser. Does that happen with what you're talking with? If we have the development charges in place, then that wouldn't be as people wouldn't be as willing to get into it. The developers wouldn't be as quick to do those kinds of pieces if they had to pay the development charges.
Now, in that example, you're basically mentioning a developer basically just site developing without pulling any building permits. So really, the investment that they're recouping through that sale would be the internal works that weren't development charge related.
But I was told that if once they go in and they do any kind of site alteration, they would pay the development charge. They would have to pay it normally at that rate, but if they hadn't paid it and they did all the site alterations, they said that then they could turn around and sell that property ready to go with site alterations in place, and they would benefit by probably increased costs because they've got the property ready to be sold. And if you haven't charged those development charges, then the city again would have to pay for those with a new developer.
Well, actually, for that example, the development charges would still be borne on whoever develops those lots. So if that developer were to sell it to developer B, developer A sells it to developer B, even though it's an enhanced property, whoever pulls out the building permit in order to build a house on there would, in theory, pay a development charge if you were to have one in place.
If we had them, excuse me, if we had them in place.
Yes.
But if we didn't have them in place, they could. So basically, one developer could benefit from the next one if they weren't in place. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Bruna?
Thank you, Worship. One I forgot to ask you, can one subdivide DC charges by a new build or infill?
As of right now, we've provided it for basically for the citywide, regardless whether it's a new build or an infill.
But one can differentiate or to have a different charge?
It would be a little bit more difficult to do, just because then we'd have to isolate, what percentage would be infill versus a new build, and in that case, you're looking more into a CIP kind of program where if you're infilling within a downtown area, you'd like to provide them a separate, again, an offshoot of the similar charges, but maybe at a different.
Where I'm going
policy.
without the CIP example, I understand that is, if we have specific infills where we're not going to assume a road from the developer, we're not going to assume all these costs, and they're pre-built. Yeah, there might be a spot in the plant you have to do it at water and wastewater, but just looking at incentivizing infill, verticals, things like that, where there's already water, wastewater, sidewalks, streets, et cetera, et cetera.
And again, through that example, I would suggest if it's isolated to a certain area, unless this is something that you'd like to look at citywide, staff and council could look at policy in order to have some kind of incentive program based on that criteria.
So it's not just arbitrary, we can say 50% charge if it's infill.
There'd have to be some kind of
Rationale
behind
Sure,
it.
thank you.
Good. Any further questions? No? Thanks, Byron. Now we have questions from the public, correct?
Correct, so you just have to read a little bit here before we open the public meeting.
Yep.
Sorry. So just before we open the meeting to the public, I just need to read the following. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Port Colborne before a decision on the proposed background study and development charges bylaw update is passed by council, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the City of Port Colborne Council to Local Planning Appeal Tribunal. And if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submission to the City of Port Colborne before a decision on the proposed background study and development charges bylaw update is passed by council, the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there is reasonable grounds to do so. And I'll just make note here that if there are any interested members of the public, there is a sheet at the back of the room if you'd like to put your name down to receive future notices regarding this application for anybody that's here.
Okay, thank you, Todd.
And that's it. So I'll
Any questions
return
from
it
the
to you.
public? Yeah. Just press the red button, state your name and address, please.
My name is Heather McDougall, 5474 Fire Lane 22. The question is to do with rural and the wastewater and the water. So if you're building a house in the rural, would you still be paying for that? Because you wouldn't have wastewater or water.
Yeah, that's not included, correct?
It's not included in
Yeah.
development charges?
Yeah.
It was just the
Okay.
versus the citywide, so they would be the citywide.
Yeah,
Sorry,
so,
what's
yeah,
that?
it's not included, no.
So they would
There'd
not
be,
have
there'd be an
any
urban
development
charge
charges in
and
the
then there'd be a rural charge.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Okay, good, thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none? Todd, explanation of future meetings.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this concludes the public meeting under the Development Charges Act. The proposed background study and development charges will be placed on council's agenda at a future meeting.
Great, thank you.
That is all. Thank you, sir.
Move to adjourn. Counselor Danch, Counselor Bodnar, all those in favor? That's carried. So I'll call the Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Introduction of addendum items or delegation items. Madam Clerk?
There are none this evening.
Have a mover and a seconder for confirmation of the agenda. Counselor Desmarais, Counselor Bruno, any questions? All those in favor? That is carried. Any disclosures of interest this evening? Seeing none. Adoption of the minutes. Regular meeting of Committee of the Whole 21-19 held on August 12th, 2019. Mover and a seconder. Counselor Danch, Counselor Beauregard, questions? All those in favor? That's carried. Determination of items requiring separate discussion. Counselor Beauregard.
Item number 3.
Counselor Bruno.
Item 1.
Anybody else? Yes?
Item 6, please.
Oh, okay.
Just a question.
Can I get a mover to approve the items not requiring separate discussion? Mover and a seconder. Counselor Beauregard, Counselor Bagu, questions? All in favor? That's carried. Presentations, we have none. We have one delegation this evening. Jody Shanoff, Vice President, Consultation and Engagement, and Veronix regarding the Regional Governance Review Survey. And all of council received that last week when I sent it out to you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, councillors, city staff. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm Jody Shanoff. I'm a vice president with Environics Research in Toronto. And we were engaged through the region of Niagara, through a 13 CAO working committee to undertake a study of residents across the region on the topic of regional review. That said, that wasn't the prompt for people who participated in the study. We worked our way towards that topic, since it's not something that is understood to be top of mind in Ontario right now for folks other than those of us who touch two-tier government in the province. So what I have here tonight are a summary of the findings from the larger report. As suggested, that larger report has been provided to each of the municipalities, to all of the councillors across the region of Niagara. So I will go through the high-level findings, and am happy to answer any questions as a result. Maybe the most important part of a public opinion survey is establishing that you're dealing with a rigorous methodology, and that you can consider the results to be reliable. And so in this case, the study was conducted by telephone across the region, as opposed to other methodologies that can be used in more densely populated areas in the province. In total, we spoke to 832 residents across the region. The way the demographics break out across the region are here. In total, 51 residents in Port Colborne participated in the study. I should also add that in an effort to ensure that we were touching all of the demographics across the region, 25% of our sample was conducted using cell phone only households. That's a subgroup within the population that gets bigger and bigger every year as people resist getting a landline. We also set some quotas to ensure that we had adequate representation of men and women, as well as different age groups across the region. And following the collection of data, we applied statistical weighting based on 2016 census data to ensure that at the end of the day, the data set that we were dealing with and looking at the results is in fact representative of the region on the whole. So as I suggested at the beginning, we didn't jump right in and ask people what they think about the regional governance review conducted by the provincial government. We eased people towards a discussion of the topic. We started with just general metrics that we're very familiar with when it comes to understanding citizen satisfaction and levels of comfort with local governance. So whether that's a single tier or, in this case, two-tier governance. And in this case, we saw across the region, 76% of Niagara region residents feel well served by the two-tier government that's here. I should also add, I'm going to focus on the region-wide results. The results particular to each of the 12 lower-tier municipalities are in the broader report. But what I will say is that results from the city of Port Colborne basically mirror what we see from the region at large. So you can consider the results that you're seeing to be representative of what residents here in the city told us. So again, overall, 3/4 of residents in the region feeling well served by the two-tier government. Only just under 1 in 5 who feel they're not well served. Some broad demographic trends with that in general. We find that residents over the age of 55 tend to be a little more skeptical about some of these issues, and we see that across the data. But other than that, not a lot of really significant demographic differences across the region. Excuse me. Beyond understanding whether or not there's a sense of satisfaction and comfort with two-tier municipal government, we also ask residents to set aside their political views and tell us how effective or ineffective they feel the structure is when it comes to representing their views within the region. Here we see over half, so 57% feel as though they're effectively represented within the region, and just over a third feel that the representation is in fact ineffective, but a very small proportion, 14%, who feel strongly about that. There were a few opportunities throughout the survey to ask what we refer to as open-ended questions. So instead of prompting participants with responses that they could select, they could tell us in their own words how they felt about some of the questions they were being asked. In this case, we asked them to describe why. So for respondents who felt as though they were effectively represented, what was the basis of that evaluation? The top responses tend to be not having had any complaints or frustrations when it comes to dealing with the two tiers of government. Feeling a connection with local representation was also a popular response. The greatest response, so 20%, told us that they felt good about excuse me, being effectively represented, but they had a caveat, and that's quite typical as well, I would add, for any kind of research that assesses, in particular, a level of government. People have generally positive things to say often, but they always hold back that there are opportunities for improvement, and that's what that 20% are telling us here. Another metric that we look at when we're assessing levels of satisfaction, in particular with municipal governments, is whether or not residents feel as though they derive value for the taxes that they pay. So in this case, we asked Niagara Region residents both for their lower tier municipality and assessment of value for taxes, as well as at the regional level. And the findings are typical of what we see in other two-tier municipalities across the province. So overall, people feel as though or they offer the most positive assessment when it comes to the lower tier municipality. So 76% feel as though they're getting good value for their lower tier municipal taxes. And only slightly fewer, so 67, say the same about regional taxes. These numbers are virtually identical when it comes to isolating and looking specifically at residents at Port Colborne. We then start to get into different variations on government and start to test people's appetite for any kind of changes. In this case, we start by asking if there's a preference when it comes to representation within a two-tier municipal government. So is it the current state where there are two sets of councillors, and we do explain in each instance what that looks like for residents within the cities. So if it's two sets of councillors to represent at lower tier and regional government, or if it were to be one set of councillors to represent in both cases. And here we see, and I didn't mention this earlier, but we have a margin of error of 3.4 percentage points, 19 out of 20 times for this data. And so what this slide tells us is that it's a virtual deadlock in terms of residents in the region considering whether or not they would prefer to see representatives at both levels or one set of representatives to represent at both levels of municipal government. It's a toss-up, and it is the same to be said in Port Colborne as well. And this is not to suggest that people are looking for wide-scale change, but we see through other research where people are where they have an ear for things that suggest efficiencies, and a lot of public discourse about finding cost savings. This tends to be one of the ways in which people identify with that. We counseled the CAOs and the region not to ask residents straight out if they prefer the municipal structure they have now or some version of amalgamation, because a question like that assumes that people understand the implications of those scenarios. So we came at it another way, and we have done this type of research in other municipalities as well. And the approach that we recommended involved determining what types of responsibilities within regional and municipal governance are important to residents and prioritizing those. And that's what this slide tells us. And then later we will ask them to consider applying different variations of two-tier governance and which of those they think best deliver on these responsibilities. So probably not very surprisingly, when we ask people how important these various responsibilities and aspects of representation are, they're all important, and we hear that often in surveys like this. But when we prioritize them using mean scores, we find that things like efficient delivery of services, having easy access to those services, and a strong sense of community are the responsibilities that come out on top. Like I suggested, then we move into asking if there were different variations of local representation, how well do you believe those would deliver on those priorities that we just discussed? This is the actual question wording that was used. We worked very closely with the 13 CAOs to ensure that that the language was relatable, but also accurate and helpful in answering the questions. And basically what we positioned here was a comparison between the current structure, so no change, what you know that you have now, a little bit of language around partial amalgamation, and I pause there to make it clear that on the phone it was defined as a scenario that combines some Niagara area municipalities into larger municipal governments which are responsible for delivering services. We did not specify which municipalities, we did not specify any proposals or other configurations that may have been in public discourse across the region, but tried to frame it as some change, and then a lot of change option is just total amalgamation, where we explain that all municipalities are combined. So then we revisit those priorities and ask which of those scenarios, and we ask them to choose one. We don't ask for ranking. It's just which of these would do the best job at delivering on these responsibilities. And so we see in the case of 2 in particular, the strong sense of community and having access to counselors, that the current scenario clearly carries the majority of support, whereas others, the current scenario is still the preference of a plurality of residents who live in the region. And that's not a surprise when we're talking about something that people are familiar with. There is some support for the different amalgamation scenarios, but it's quite diffuse, and there are not clear patterns in why or how people prefer that outcome when they select it. So overall, our interpretation of this was that the current scenario kind of carries the day, and in particular for the priority areas at the top of the list. We also asked whether residents of the region felt that if municipal government was somehow reorganized into a larger government, would they anticipate an improvement in the delivery of services or a decline? And in this case, it's close, but a plurality anticipate that there would be a decline, and in particular 25%. So not an insignificant proportion of residents anticipate that the decline in service delivery would be significant. And that's where you have to start to worry about and wonder about people becoming vocal about being unhappy about an outcome. So those are the high-level findings. Again, there are lots of others in the report. But overall, our key takeaways were that Niagara Region residents clearly articulated a level of comfort and satisfaction with the 2-tier governance they currently experience. They feel well represented, they feel effectively represented, and they derive value for the taxes that they pay at both levels. So there wasn't a lot of dissatisfaction there. As with any kind of investigation of satisfaction and looking at alternatives within a governance model, there are limited pockets of appetite for some kind of change, or open to the possibility that there may be an upside through some variations, like one set of counselors instead of 2. But we see in other metrics that are in the larger report that when those are tested against things like a change in the tax regime or just a change in delivering on some of those responsibilities, they meet with quite a bit of resistance. The anticipated decline in service delivery is one of those. And finally, we saw in the results that people generally felt that the governance model that they're accustomed to currently is the one they feel best suited to deliver on the priorities and the responsibilities that they look for from this council and from regional council. And again, the resistance when there's consideration that things could change significantly if a different outcome was brought into the region. There are pockets of some pretty significant resistance that you'd have to be aware of and be attuned to when they expressed that unhappiness. So those are the high-level findings from the study. I'm happy to answer any questions, Your Worship, through you as a result.
Thanks, Jody. Any questions to the speaker? No question? Yep, Gary?
Just wondering, Jody, with the concern of amalgamation, not just focused on Niagara, have you been doing any other work on this for any other regional governments this round?
We have been commissioned by other regions, and we've also taken on our own proprietary investigations in different regions where we typically conduct research.
I don't know if you're at liberty to say, but in general terms, are you finding commonality?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. In general terms, people are comfortable with what they know and with what they have. Yes.
So a lot of the findings here, you've had them in the other regions that are under the microscope right now.
A lot of the findings are similar. Niagara region is particular in our investigation because it's the region with the most municipalities and the most possible different outcomes that are difficult to get into in any kind of detail. So
yes.
we caveat this investigation when we compare it to other regions that don't have quite as many possible outcomes.
Great, thank you.
Good. Okay. Oh, Councillor?
Through Your Worship, to our presenter, or even to you, has this study been shared with the government, with the provincial government at all? Like, are they aware of these findings?
Well, I don't believe, Jody, you guys have sent it, but it'll be up to the region to forward
I
it.
believe that was the topic of conversation among the CAOs the last time I participated in a meeting and a discussion.
Scott?
Yeah, through your worship to Councillor Beauregard. So this study was, I think it's fair to say, paid for by the region, but at the request of the lower tiers. As the presenters already stated, this is the partnership of the 13 CAOs at the direction of the mayors who have been discussing this governance issue. At the same time, as this survey was being conducted, the region does have a government relations GR staff person on site who's working on preparing an entire package to present to the province, and this survey is going to be a part of that package.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks again, Jody.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I have a short mayor's report tonight, and yesterday afternoon at Sugarloaf Harbor Marina, a boat caught on fire about 100 meters from our fuel dock. The occupants of the boat made it safely to shore after abandoning ship. However, the boat continued to float around the marina unmanned. It was an easterly wind yesterday, so it actually blew it towards our main docks. There were several people in the marina at the time who took quick action to help move the boat away from the docks using jet skis and extinguishing the fire on the end of one dock before considerable damage could occur. These individuals risked their lives to protect the property of others, and we do thank them. Also, to the members of our fire department for responding as well, we thank them. This was probably a very major accident that could have become way bigger, believe me. I know a number of councillors have boats there. I got down there around 3:30 and all the action had finished, so there were some people talking about it, but that's all I saw. But with the way the winds were yesterday, yeah, if he blew into the main dock, not only our docks, but some pretty high-value boats are at the top end there, so it could have been, you get one boat going and the next. I've seen that on YouTube before where a marina just sweeps. So we do really thank these people, and we'll probably hear a little bit more about that later on. So that's my mayor's report this evening. And the regional councillor is away, but are there any regional questions or mayor's questions? Seeing none. Perfect. Councillor's items. I'll start to my left this week. Councillor Bodnar, anything? Councillor Kalala? Councillor Danch? You got some? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, well, I sent you guys a picture of my favorite weed again, so through you, Mr. Chris. The best part is we've got a men working sign right in front of that, and we know where it is because I took a picture of the address as well. So the last 3-4 weeks now, my wife's been on a mission to get me out walking, so every Monday, that truck seems to be out there cutting the grass at the park behind the senior center, and I'd like to see a work order put out there next week that guy walks across the street and cuts that weed down, because it's ridiculous. I mean, they're right there, so can we maybe look into that?
Chris?
To you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Danch. Well, bring that to the supervisor's attention, and we'll make certain that your weed is gone.
Perfect, because next Monday I'll be going by that again. One more item through you, Mr. Mayor.
Yep.
Bob came up to me last Tuesday, and he lives on corner of Merritt and Highway 58. And basically, he's complaining about the speeds that are being traveled in that 60 mile an hour or 60 kilometer an hour zone. And he'd like maybe a little bit of enforcement, so possibly we could get a hold of our police friends. I mean, our little kids are all going back to school next week, and we certainly have the crossing on Omer Avenue there, which is important, and I'd like to see somebody maybe do something about that if they could, please.
I'll take that one. I do have my monthly meetings with our local staff sergeant, but you will notice in the next number of weeks, they will be blitzing school zones. They do every year, which is good preventative maintenance on that. So, but I'll be talking to the staff sergeant probably later this week again. And there's a few areas that some counselors have sent me already, so we'll discuss those and their plan of action with regards to the kids going back to school. Okay, you're welcome. Councilor Borgard, anything? Councilor Bruno.
Thank you, Worship. A couple of thank yous. Councilor Danch and I have been working to try and get the King Street property flooding resolved out of the catch basins on King. That's been a problem at the outflow at the end of Neff Street. I'd like to thank Chris and Peter Pageant in the last week. They've organized a contractor, and equipment is there today, and hopefully proceeding this week for something that's been a problem for a few months now. So we'd like to thank Peter and Chris and your staff. As well, to your worship, I know tomorrow we're meeting with a resident on Barrack Road, and I'm not sure if other councillors have had this, but after a 8-year absence, I think I've had more calls about enforcement of speed and police issues than I have in any 4-year or 3-year term that I'm on. And in this case, I just keep hearing the name Barrack Road on my phone from Highway 58 to Elm Street, including now, and I'm sure this is an issue that could be resolved, but now the former Robin Hood, that it's active, which is great. Those trucks, for some reason, are starting to use Barrack Road rather than the industrial park. But speeding is still an issue on Barrack Road, and I know I brought that up before. But perhaps you can add that to your list, Mr. Mayor, again, when your conversation with the regional police. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and I will. Councillor Baggett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, I didn't have nothing until I got a phone call this afternoon. I figured last 2 weeks ago was enough. I got a phone call this afternoon, citizen relaying some information regarding the train tracks on Sugarloaf and Elm Street, the ones that we are fixing in September. That a woman on her way to work, she works in a healthcare business at a local, our hospitals or one of our manors, and her front wheel of her bike got caught in the tracks because of unevenness, and she broke an arm, from what I understand was an arm, and this woman lost 2 weeks' pay because she couldn't go to work, and basically, I think it was because more of the negligence on Trillium's part, not being proactive in fixing these safety issues before it's too late. In this case, it's too late, but maybe we could put something else up there in the meantime to warn people. Like, I'm sure this woman's driven across the tracks before to work, but this time she lost 2 weeks' pay because of a broken arm, I think it was. So just let you know that, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Desmarais?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, I have a couple of items through you to Chris. I think we'll start with you. I know that Councillor Danch and Councillor Wells have both worked on this. I just wanted to know if you have made any progress with the condition of the lighthouse in Lock 8 Park. I don't know if that's, if you're taking on that or if that's with Ashley, but there is, that building needs a lot of work.
Chris?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Demery. Actually, we were having a discussion on that specific building and its condition with some of the facilities staff just last week. I know it's in Ashley's package for her parks master plan and whether we're going to demolish it or refurbish it. So until such time, I couldn't comment one way or the other. I know we've made an assessment on it and then figured out what the cost would be roughly to repair it. So those would be submitted to Ashley when she finally gets her report back in.
Okay, thank you very much. And the other issue I wanted to talk about tonight, again, it's a traffic problem, but it's one that is kind of odd. Welland Street, just north of Clarence Street, south of Killaley East, that strip. I used to think that it was just because the lines, the painted lines faded very easily and cars didn't know where they were driving. But the fact is, if you're coming southbound, you have 2 lanes. If you're coming northbound, you have 1 lane. And you also have a curb involved, and now you have construction of a couple of houses. So the construction vehicles are in the 1 lane that was formerly able to be driven in. There's no parking space on those roads. So now what's happening is I've almost had a head-on twice, and I've seen other people doing the same thing. So we really have a problem driving in that area. There has to be some decision made going forward because the lines are more visible now than they normally are. They haven't started their fade yet. But people, they know they're not driving in the proper lane, but here they are in the oncoming lane. You're coming southbound and there's a northbound right in front of you. So we have to do something. I'm not sure what can be done about that. You're talking about 3 lanes of space and 2 directions to be traveled in, and right now one of those directions is being taken up by construction vehicles, which I know is a limited time, but maybe we could do something about that.
Todd, I don't know if you know the direct answer, but I mean, they technically they're illegally parked. If they're leaving their vehicles in a traveled lane with no parking signs on the side, is there something through bylaws that they can look at?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can talk to Sherry about this. That would likely be, I can't even really say. It could be a parking enforcement issue. I've driven by there and I've noticed the same thing because I come in and go home through that route every day. So I'll say a couple of things. One is I'll talk to Sherry and see. I'm not sure what's posted up there as far as whether there's a parking prohibition, in which case it's black and white. They shouldn't be parking there, or even a no stopping sign. I'm not sure what's there. I'll talk to Sherry about that. Being the chief building official, I can tell you I've got a framing inspection set up there tomorrow, which is a signal to me that the heaviest of the heavy construction is over. The concrete's done, the trusses have been delivered, the wood's all been delivered. It'll be a little more of a flurry of activity there, but it should be lighter traffic that's there. And once they cut their driveways, they can start parking in both of the driveways. There'll be 2 driveways in front of there. It's a semi-detached building that's there. So once they get their curb cuts and get their driveways in, most of the construction vehicles should be able to park off the street at that point. This problem will probably resurface again there in the future when they go to do the grading, the lot grading there. We'll probably see a flurry of heavier equipment, float trailers and stuff will be there again. I wouldn't anticipate that starts until probably next spring at the earliest on that. But I will talk to Sherry about what the parking, what the legal parking is there.
Okay, well, thank you. That'll help for the short term. But even so, with the long term, I mean, last year and the year before and the 5 years before that, we haven't had a house being built there, and yet we still had the same problems. I know Councillor Elliott used to complain about the same thing. He and I each almost got hit on the same day. There's a problem with traffic flow on that particular curve. And when you, like I say, you have 3 lanes of traffic and you have 2 directions. And you've got a curve, and it's a very difficult situation. So, and you have a couple of intersections involved as well, and a train track. So, it's just a recipe for disaster, and maybe we could just put some thought into how to go forward with that. That's all.
So Todd, do you want to take that back to Sherry also with regards to that stretch of road as far as current markings, safety issues, and what may need to come forward?
Yeah, that should be easy to figure out what the provisions are there right now.
Okay.
I'll get back to you. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Councillor. Thanks. Anything else? Oh, Counselor Bodnar, yes, we'll come back to you.
Or I reserve the right to.
Yes, you do, yes.
So just, as I hear about speed on the roads and everything, there's going to be a unique problem on Empire Road, Beach Road, with the amount of dump trucks leaving Shirks and Shores, and with the kids going back to school and waiting very close to the roads for the buses. And there's a number of buses there. I wonder if whether we could contact Shirkson and ask the contractor, which I think is Peters, to inform any truck drivers there that, look, this is back to school time. Be extra careful. On Empire Road, there is a hill involved there, and a house that kind of hides a little bit of the school buses and that. So I think it's just be proactive and let that contractor deal with it as they can, if that's okay.
Okay, Scott?
Yeah, through your worship to Councillor Bodnar, we have somewhat good relations with Peters Excavating, so I'll ask our director to ask Steve Schapowski to contact them and see if they'll voluntarily be a little bit more complicit, complying with our rules and our suggestions.
Sure. All right. One more. Also, I wonder, Chris, if you could look into, I had an email saying that some of the dump trucks coming out of that construction are now going down Beach Road and using Pleasant Beach Road. Is Pleasant Beach Road constructed like Empire Road? Can it handle those extra trucks? I'm not even sure. I just got this email saying that they're actually doing this, but is that a truck road or can they do that?
Chris?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Bodnar. Empire Road is a much heavier constructed road. It was originally a regional road and then the city assumed it, so it has never had any truck restrictions on it. Pleasant Beach, that hasn't got truck restrictions on it, but it was never built to the specifications that Empire was built to. That being said, empty trucks wouldn't be a problem there, but a continual barrage of heavy loaded trucks would eventually cause us problems.
So, CAO, you'll bring that up
Yes.
through Chris's staff also, please?
Yes.
And you may want to contact Shirks at the same time, just tell them what's going on. Okay, Ryan? Good. Consideration of items requiring, any staff responses?
Just one.
Yes.
So on Sunday, through your worship to council, on Sunday to Wednesday of the last week, I had the good fortune to attend the Association of Municipalities of Ontario conference along with Councillor Clayliff. There's a number of sessions there. I'm just reading my notes, including fast tracking the planning process, and human resources update on fire negotiations, police negotiations, EMS, emerging trends in health and safety, and so on. A 1 year later review of recreational cannabis being legalized. Every major provincial political leader had a speech, including the premier and the deputy premier, and the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. And there's an interesting thing that happens at AMO that those council members who have been there before will recall, sort of informally called the Bear Pit. It's called the Ministers Forum, where virtually every single provincial minister is on a stage, 28 or 30 people across, and different council members from different municipalities go up to 5 microphones and basically spend an hour hitting them with pretty tough questions and putting them on the spot and trying to get some answers from the province on some of the issues that affect municipalities like ours. Also ran into a pretty good crew from Niagara. Virtually the only municipality I didn't see was Thorold, and they might have been there and I've just missed them. Quite a few from the region. And of course, a great trade show that we see many of the products that the municipality already uses and might consider to use someday. And that was it.
Okay, any questions on that? We look forward to Councillor Clayliff's report on this coming up shortly. Any other staff? Great, thank you. Now we're on to items requiring separate discussion. Item 1, Councillor Bruno.
Thank you, Worship. Planning Development Department Report 2019-1 128, subject Planning and Development Department fees.
Have a seconder for that, Councillor Demeray, Councillor Bruno.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Todd. Todd, one of the things I noticed in there is we have a number of categories for fees on page 252 and 253 of the report. One of the committees I'm on is economic development, and a subset of that is, the subcommittees are, one is about housing development in Port Colborne. And we have not come forward, but we've interviewed some developers, and we're looking to make some recommendations to that committee and hopefully back to council at a point to be determined, probably late fall or spring. One of the early ideas is with respect to condominium developers, and given one of the basis of our conversation is Port Colborne's location on rock and the difficulty in developing. And so hence verticals and for affordable housing apartments are two of the things that have come forward. I would like, as a placeholder, a technical modification made. There's at least 5 to 6 fee schedule line items that talk about plan of subdivision / condo. I'd like to request that the fees not change at this time, but that they be line items separately, so it would be plan of subdivision underneath plan of condominium as opposed to one line. In the eventuality, if the committee ever decided to do something creatively different between subdivision and residential development and condominium, at least there would be that placeholder there, and we could modify that fee versus the other.
Todd?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Bruno. Yeah, I can take that back to our planning staff. I appreciate the efficiency that creates. So I can take that back to Dan and Dave and see what they think about that, and they can bring it back.
Great.
Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Bodnar?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure exactly who to direct this to, but in here I didn't see anything about site plan alteration. Like we're dealing with the quarry now, and there's been some concern that the charge may not be enough. And anything going forward, I understand we probably can't go backwards because they've applied under the old one, but is there not a chance now to put something in there that might reflect what we're dealing with now?
I'll refer to the CAO.
So through your worship to Councillor Bodnar, this is exactly the department where site alterations would be contemplated, and I don't see it either, but unless Todd knows more than I know.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to CEO Louis, I don't see it specifically here. I've only just started looking at it since you brought it up a moment ago. I will say I don't believe this is the forum to discuss its inclusion or its change. That would be at when we review the rates and fees bylaw, which will be in a couple of months. I believe in the fall we'll be reviewing the fees again. I believe this report here for information was to explain the root of our fees and where they came from, which doesn't explain its absence here. But if it were here, is it correct?
So yeah, so through your worship to Councillor Bodnar, I think the idea here was this would be an exhaustive list of department fees. So I'm wondering if it was an oversight by staff preparing the report, possibly a different schedule that didn't get included. So if it's okay with you, I think I would recommend approving this report as it is today. This isn't changing any fees. These fees are already in force. This is for council's information only, and I'll bring a second report forward through the director of planning that includes that fee that was obviously missed. Because there is an established fee, and that is the fee that we apply all of the time, including most recently in that Port Colborne Quarries application.
Any other questions? Too far. So we have a motion moved and seconded. All those in favor? That's carried. Item 3, Councillor Borgard.
Item 3, Corporate Services Department Clerks Division Report 2019-130, subject shopping cart bylaw.
Seconder for that? Councillor Temeray. Councillor Horner.
Yes, through your worship, I would just like to say thank you to our CAO Scott Louie and to our clerk Amber for bringing this forward. I swear you were listening to Councillor Bruno and I's discussion last couple of weeks ago when we left the last meeting and we saw shopping carts out there, and I was saying how I really don't like that. I think this is really a continuation of what Councillor Bruno started with the tearing down of the signs on poles and what we do for Canal Days and keeping this community clean. We have a vision of Port Colborne being a clean municipality that's beautiful, right? We have the promenade, which is excellent, and the additions to it that we've seen this year. Our vision of PC is beautiful, and abandoned grocery store carts are not part of that vision. So I am happy to see this forward. I understand there may be some controversial aspects in having it, some of the liability be to the business owners as well as to the individuals. However, I believe that is necessary in order for it to be implemented and to work effectively. So thank you, and I will vote in favor of this.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clayliff, Councillor Bodnar, then Councillor Danch.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I couldn't agree with you more, Councillor Beauregard. My husband takes carts back pretty well every day. He's been gone for the last week, so they didn't get taken back. Last week I pushed back 12 with him. I have spoken with the owner of the store. We've talked about different things. I suggested, putting a monetary value on the carts. He said he didn't feel that he thought they'd still be taken. I had a couple of discussions with him. He does have a gentleman that he is supposed to be picking the carts up. I spoke with that gentleman as well. He gave me his phone number, but he didn't want to give it to anyone else because he didn't want other people calling him particularly. It's just a really tough situation. But then if you look at the other side, my concern is legally the carts belong to the store and they're being stolen. So here we are, they're being stolen, and so you could technically they're worth $400 to $500, and if you called the police, the people taking them would be charged. And here we are going to take them back, and we're going to charge the store. So I just have questions about it. I want a solution. Believe me, I would love to do this, but are we within our rights to do this?
Sure.
Amber, maybe you know.
CAO.
Sorry, for your worship to Councillor Clayliff, and I guess the city clerk might want to jump in on this too. First of all, I can't take any of the credit for this bylaw. This has been a pet peeve of mine for the 4 years that I've worked here. But Amber was the employee who finally got the ball rolling and now to this stage of completion, which I think is fantastic. To Councillor Beauregard's point, Councillor Clayliff, the objective of this bylaw is voluntary compliance. These shopping carts are a nuisance, I think, in the downtown core where shoppers use them incorrectly to leave the grocery store and take their purchases to their home or to the bus and then abandon them and leave them to be someone else's problem. There is an ownership onus on the store owner to secure them and make sure that erroneous use isn't taking place. So we're striving for voluntary compliance. We know that there's the coin lock mechanism. We know that there's a electronic wheel lock that if it goes a certain distance from the store, the owner could do any of these things. We have checked in the Municipal Act. We know that these bylaws exist in other jurisdictions in Ontario. We're well within our legal rights to enforce this bylaw. But our first, I guess, wish is voluntary compliance. I don't know if you have
that.
I'm fine with that. I just, like I said, I was a little nervous about it when I saw it, but I'm happy to hear it because they're everywhere.
We do have legal authority under the Municipal Act and the Repair and Storage Liens Act. I know a piece of legislation we're not always reading regularly, but I did find it, and we just have to set out actual process and fees, and that's what this bylaw does, because we did really question what authority we do have, and this bylaw will set that out.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bodnar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree that they're a pain in the butt when you see them all over the place. And there are obvious solutions. I guess my question is, through you to the clerk, I guess, is that, and rightly so, the onus is on the owner of the cart that has to, either collect them or now pay a fee to get them back. But these carts just don't spontaneously run away like a dog. Somebody's pushing them. So where's the penalty for someone leaving that property? It says, no person shall remove a shopping cart from the premises of the business that owns or uses a shopping cart. These people get fined. They're the ones that are taking them off the lot. They just don't run wild down the street. Somebody's doing it. So through you to the clerk, have we thought of a penalty for the person pushing the cart?
Madam Clerk?
Through the mayor, this bylaw does put the onus on the property owner to secure their property through a shopping cart management system. But we do have that in the bylaw, that it is just a kind of a reminder that it is illegal to remove someone else's property, but it is the requirement of the property owner to secure their property and call the police if the property is being removed.
Councillor Danch?
I can just see the cops when you call and say, there's a shopping cart person going down the road right now, and it's a green one from Sobeys. But I really don't think you should be, we all hate them. And you say the downtown core, well, I'm Ward 3 and I'm that street. And they're up against the pole. And they are a problem. I think maybe going to the 3-4 big chains we have and talking to them and saying, listen guys, you gotta get that restrictive wheel on it or something like that, because the next thing's gonna be Tim Hortons cups, because I'm sick of picking those up, but that's another one. But I really don't think I think a proper letter to these owners, and we all hate them, they're out there, but when you're going through the store, you cannot carry that much stuff in your arms. You need that shopping cart. So I just think we gotta sometimes walk softly.
Staff will be approaching all the businesses with relation to this, and they'll be talking about this in education. So, okay. I mean, I know it's not a problem out in Gasline where the large Bodner store out there. I've never seen a shopping cart disappear from that place.
We have very respectable.
I just thought it was the heavy hand of the owner out there before you leave the premise. Councillor Demeray, then Councillor Bruno.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm really very happy to see this bylaw finally come in place. I looked it up in my notes when I first received the council package, and I saw that the bylaw was there. I went back through my notes and saw my first complaint here at this horseshoe with regards to the shopping carts was in 2011. So it's been a while. This has really been going on for some time. And I know that former Councillor Kenny is going to be extremely pleased to see this, because this drove her crazy. But it's important that we go to do this. The bylaw will be probably the best tool moving forward, but we should be also considering trying to find some way to make the bus routes more amenable to shopping, so there's stops near the grocery stores, things like that, because it is difficult. I mean, how do you walk around with a pile of shopping bags? It's very hard to do, and make it really clear that some of these stores, if they were smart, they'd be selling the little buggies. They're like $12, for a little buggy that you can pull behind them. They'd be selling those right at the checkout. I mean, they sell the bags, sell the buggies. Those are good things to do. There are ways to make it easier for people, and maybe they will start exploring that too. But thank you so much for it. I'm really glad to see this one. Thanks.
Great, Councillor. Councillor Bruno?
Thank you, Worship. Of course, at the end of all this, there's someone who actually has to pick up the cart.
Yes.
And so it's my understanding, perhaps Amber, if you could elaborate on it. So I originally thought it would be bylaw because they might be traveling around the city. I now understand its operations. And so, is that been designated as proactive, or is it complaint driven? Somebody's got one out front of their house. That's question one. Question two, through you to maybe Chris, is that going to be part of road patrol? That's sort of the person that's driving around doing a lot of this other stuff. Just want to know the mechanics of the after the incident has been brought to the attention of the city?
Yeah, so the Director of Engineering Operations can elaborate, of course, but I believe it is going to be proactive in regards to city property and near roadways. When they are cleaning it up, they will be picking up those shopping carts, and then it will be on a complaint basis in other areas.
If you want to make it proactive, I would suggest that you actually put that in here.
All for proactive, Mr. Mayor.
Correct. I'm just saying, as an amendment, I would, if you want to bring that forward,
Yeah.
you'll make that amendment?
I will.
That this will be proactive? The seconder will second that? Okay. Comment on that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the rest of council. As of about 3 weeks ago, operational staff has been proactive. Anytime staff is driving around town and they see a cart, they put it in the back of the vehicle if they have facilities to it, or if not, they make certain that somebody that is in the neighborhood or going by will. Just as a note, in 1 week, we gathered in excess of 30 some odd carts just by the random picking up as we went along on city road allowances. As a comical note to that equation, they went to pick up one and somebody came out of the laundromat and chased them down and said, "You're stealing my buggy." So we said, well, that's yours, take it home with you, but anyway.
Okay, that's fine. So I understand that, that's what you're doing, but just to be sure that there is some teeth in this, it is a very proactive piece of legislation. So on the amendment, we have a mover and a seconder. All those in favor of the amendment? That's carried. Now the main motion is amended. Any further questions? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. And our last item is item 6, memorandum, Councillor Desmarais.
Thank you. Memorandum from Carrie McIntosh, Deputy Clerk, report Colborne Harvest Festival.
Can I get a seconder to this? Councillor Beauregard. Councillor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I pulled this specifically to ask a question. I volunteered for this event in the past, and one of the problems that does occur is that there's no washrooms. And last year it was really bad. There were just no washrooms. None of the stores would let anybody go and use those washrooms. And you've got a pile of tourists coming in to attend an event. If we could have maybe arranged to have a City Hall first floor open to get those washrooms available or something, because it is a challenge.
Deputy Clerk?
So, Mr. Mayor, through you to Councillor Desmarais, I believe that event staff will actually be bringing a report to the next meeting of council to address all of the operational and logistical needs. So this is really just approving that if they want to go ahead with their liquor license, that you've approved them as a significant event.
Yeah, and I believe this was time sensitive, so that's why it's coming first. All right? So, perfect. Okay, any other questions on this? All those in favor? That's carried. Any notices of motion? Move to adjourn. Councillor Beauregard, Councillor Danch. All those in favor? That's carried. Twist it up a little bit tonight. That's right. So we'll call the regular meeting of council to order. Any introduction of addendum items? Madam Clerk?
There are none this evening.
Mover and a seconder for confirmation of the agenda. Councillor Bruno, Councillor Desmarais. Questions? All in favor? That's carried. Any disclosures of interest? None. Adoption of minutes. We have the regular minutes of council 22-19 held on August 12th, 2019. A mover and a seconder. Councillor Beauregard, Councillor Desmarais. All in favor? That's carried. Anybody want to lift any items? Seeing that, we mover and a seconder for the approval of all items. Councillor Beauregard, Councillor Danch. Any questions? All those in favor? That's carried. No proclamations. We have one set of minutes of the minutes of the Board of the Public Library meeting of June the 4th, 2019. Mover and a seconder. Councillor Desmarais, Councillor Bruno. Any questions? All those in favor? It's carried. Madam Clerk, consideration of bylaws.
There are 5 bylaws this evening. Bylaws number 6713-77-19 and 2 bylaw 6717-81-19.
Okay, any questions on the bylaws? Mover and seconder, Counselor Bodnar, you move that? Counselor Clayliff, you'll second it? Any questions, all in favor? Oh, yes, go ahead, Counselor.
Is this something new that we're not reading all the bylaws?
Correct.
Okay.
It's not needed. But you can ask a question on any of them. All right? All those in favor? That's carried. Motion to adjourn. Counselor Danch. Counselor Beauregard. All in favor? That's carried.